and welcome to the Black Blockchain Summit 2020. And this year we are coming to you virtual. And today we are talking enabling sustainable energy and environmental justice with blockchain. So I would love to take this time to welcome everyone to the panel. We're going to have a discussion, some kind of talk, some kind of chat, nothing too complicated. So I guess we'll start by introducing ourselves and looking at the topic. We see what you, and I'll say what you understand when we talk sustainable energy and environmental justice, what comes into your mind, and how blockchain can play a part in enabling a sustainable energy and environmental justice. So I would love to kick up the discussion by having Adrian start. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You say your views, what you think, what comes into your mind when you think energy, environmental justice, and the blockchain. Adrian, and then I have Melo, Tasha, Telly, Virat, and I think it's Eden, if I'm not mistaken. Take this time, introduce yourself, and then get straight into saying what you know or what's your view, what comes into your mind when you hear the topic.
So good morning. My name is Adrian Gardner. I am, I'd say, a 30-year career federal servant, civil servant with the U.S. government. I retired about a year ago, but my experience spans across FEMA, where I was the Chief Information Officer for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is the United States agency that leads all emergency management and response and recovery operations for the country. Prior to that, I was the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center CIO, where I dealt with a lot of the environmental sensing and satellite capabilities around data and the way that the planet has evolved, and been very involved in technology there. And then prior to that, I was a Weather Service Chief Information Officer, where I manage all weather data nationwide and internationally for the U.S. To include interfacing with supercomputing capabilities and the United States model for predicting weather. And then I started my career at the Department of Energy, and I was there for 17 years. And I'm a trained environmental scientist, although I'm an IT tech guy. So the issue of sustainability and environmental justice is near and dear to my heart. When I was with Department of Energy, I was at the beginning of the environmental justice discussion within the United States, where we, Department of Energy and several other agencies began to work along with EPA to look at the issues of the way that a lot of the federal resources were impacting underserved communities and at-risk communities. And so one of the I think the important aspects of today is really looking at where we've come from and where we are today. And one would say that we've made a lot of progress, but then in other aspects, you would say we haven't made any progress at all. Because one of the things that you've seen with COVID-19 is that what's come to the forefront is the social determinants that have impacted Black, brown, yellow people continue to play out as a reality that there are disparities in the way that the pandemic has hit our communities and the way in which it has hit sort of the majority or the white populations within the United States. How does that apply to blockchain? I think it's all about this new normal, right? I think that I would say that there are opportunities to leverage blockchain to empower our communities, both from a standpoint of looking at our finances, because one of the things that I've been communicating to people is that we have to take back our power, right? And part of that is owning our data, owning our information, and owning our resources. And as systems that we don't own, can't manage, can't direct, can't empower or influence, right? And so one of the for us to now begin to take control of the way that we look at the financial health and welfare and sustainability of those communities And if we begin to pool the power of those communities, I believe that we can empower them. And so one of the things that I did after I left government was I started a nonprofit, which is called the Smart Tech Nexus Foundation, which is focused on empowering communities to empower themselves. Because even from a standpoint of looking at policing, we have the power to police our communities. Now, we have given that that power over to the cities and states and federal government. But at the end of the day, we used to police ourselves. And so we also have to look at how can we begin to look at these institutional organizations, these institutional processes, and bring them back and to the community where the community controls them. So I'll stop there, and then we can have let the other panelists chime in.
Thank you very much for those wonderful points that you brought forward. So I'd love to hear Melo.
Yes, sorry. Look, on my side, yeah, look, I think the points that you've raised, geez, are very true. I mean, our Black communities, I mean, when you look at us here in Africa, South Africa, yeah, I mean, we've been, you know, incredibly, what can I say, disadvantaged. And I think, you know, we were previously disadvantaged. And I think just now with COVID, it further exacerbates our current situation. And, you know, even when you look at South Africa itself, I mean, around the time just before COVID was, you know, building up and everything, we went into junk status. We went into economic junk status. And, you know, our economy is really been suffering. And look, a lot of people, even in Africa, we look at blockchain as another way out, you know, as a way out for financial freedom, you know, looking for financial inclusion. And that's why even with us these days, that's why we try and involve ourselves with various things that, you know, involve the African financial inclusion, international inclusion, and, you know, in terms of cross-border remittance. So, yeah, coming back to COVID, it's a very interesting thing. You know, what is blockchain doing for COVID? You know, with us, we created a crowdfunding platform and repurposed our technology for crowdfunding to help people accept funds, and you know, to help those in need to try and track it. And you know, as some of you may know, we are in the wildlife and conservation industry, and you know, we've been very negatively impacted because a lot of our revenue comes from ecotourism. So without the international visitors, you know, we've been dearly impacted. So we haven't been able to feed our animals, you know, and we look at the most kind of critical species, which are the rhinos. So we've been trying to, you know, find ways through blockchain to kind of help those different aspects. But I still believe there's great opportunities for more inclusion for, you know, for Africans, and that could have kind of paved the way and protected us from a lot of the things that are going on right now with COVID.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tumelo. Tasha?
Thank you. I'll start with a brief introduction and then go into my thoughts about blockchain and environmental justice. And if I could touch on the conversation here, I'll attempt to do that. I'm coming at this conversation from a purely technical perspective. My background is over 20-something years in power systems design for mission critical facilities. And I'm currently leading a large engineering team at a renewable energy company to build utility scale solar plants. And so my connection to sustainable energy is about a decade long, where I've built some of the world's largest utility scale solar plants. When I first started building the plants, the largest one is actually in the Mojave Desert, which, you know, from a environmental justice standpoint is out where economically depressed areas typically are. The tax base is low, the skill set is low in that particular area. I'm currently building utility scale plants, 100 megawatts or better, over in the southeast region, where we're retiring coal-fired plants that economically depressed areas. And so when I think about environmental justice, I think about how we've historically placed these resources, power generating resources in areas that provided pollutants, took up, I guess, impacted the soil. And, now that a lot of these plants in the Southeast are being decommissioned and we're replacing them with solar plants, our firm is actually working on actually recovering the land under the solar panels. So we're using what we call regenerative energy, where we're using sheep and goats and other types of animals to feed on the soils under, or the grass that's planted under the solar panels to regenerate that agricultural land. So that's what I think about when I think about, environmental justice, removing the pollutants from our depressed communities, bringing in a strong tax base with these utility scale plants, giving opportunities and jobs to economically depressed communities. Now, as it relates to blockchain, I think that blockchain is, as it relates to what I discussed, it's the next frontier. Blockchain overlaid with our energy system facilitates peer-to-peer energy trading. A lot of my work in the past has not only been on utility scale, but also distributed generation sites. So I've designed systems that sit on buildings in metropolitan areas. And these buildings are basically forming virtual power plants where the energy is being generated and sold back to the grid, or aggregated even through technology and sold back to the grid. I think the next step is for the individual owners of these houses, buildings, whatever, to be able to sell the energy through blockchain mechanism amongst each other. So that's what I think about when I think about the convergence of all these three topics is basically empowering economically the individuals who have historically had an opportunity to partake in an industry that's been regulated. I believe you're on mute still, Alessandra.
Okay, sorry for that. Thank you very much. And I do really appreciate the points that you raised, and one of them being that, it's how we're going to empower the individuals. So, and we're looking at the theme for the summit, which is essential survivor. So we're going to be looking at this theme and try to see how really we can benefit from, coming up with sustainable solutions, coming up with solutions on the blockchain that will, use the existing infrastructure, to enable us to, have sustainable energy and environmental justice using the blockchain technology. Telly, I would like you to introduce yourself to the people around.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my name is Telly Onu. I actually live in the Caribbean. So when it comes to environmental justice and sustainable energy, it's really very close to home. So I've been at the forefront of digital finance for over 20 years. My background is very multidisciplinary. I'm a digital economist, have been a management consultant for over 20 years. In the last 10, I was said I've started a journey in terms of decentralizing impact. So along this journey, I have done a number of transformation projects, both at the enterprise level and government. And specifically when we're looking at private sector and economic development and economic governance and reform, environmental justice and sustainability comes to play really strongly. In the last, I would say, 5 years, I specialized actually in climate finance. Given the fact that, well, living in the Caribbean, if I give you some data points, We are extremely vulnerable as a society, the Caribbean and the Pacific, more so than any of the other countries, you know. So the rise in the whole global warming has caused us to feel the impact more severely than any other. So for us, it is when we look at environmental justice, we're really looking at survival for us. Because if I put it into numbers, let's start with the most recent, 2019, took us by surprise. We had Hurricane, what was it, Dorian? It hit the Bahamas. I can't tell you how many people died, but the damages were $3.4 billion. Bahamas doesn't even make $3.4 billion. And that is just damages alone. We're now thinking about how do we prevent the risk management to mitigate. And then also adapt. The adaptation costs are very significant. Let's double back and remember Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. It left $125 billion of damages. And that was in New Orleans, and it impacted people, lives, families, damages. So you're looking at catastrophic disasters happening because of global warming and because we are heavily reliant on fossil fuels for energy. So for us, it's how can we then use blockchain, one, to maybe for capital formation, mobilize the financing we need to put us in a pathway for sustainability. So right now, the focus being on the one hand, how do we mitigate the risk of and how do we make ourselves more resilient? So all of this requires significant financing, and I think one of the largest opportunities that blockchain offers us is the ability for us to leverage that mechanism of decentralization that Tasha spoke about. The fact that we're moving from a centralized energy generation to a more decentralized and distributed system. Blockchain can now power that decentralization for us to actually mobilize capital more efficiently. She had mentioned the emergence of markets, new markets. So not just energy markets, but even carbon markets. The fact that we can now analyze data, and from those data points, we can see how much carbon emissions that we are putting in the environment, or how much carbon emissions we're saving. We can now create a digital asset out of that commodity and monetize that. The fact that we can, as Camilla pointed out, we can raise funds by leveraging crowdfunding platforms, or even let's even move it along to more alternative capital markets. So for us to do that, blockchain really provides that framework to help us redesign a financial market infrastructure for it to benefit us. That's my perspective.
Thank you very much, Telly. It's very impressive. We are discussing a lot of different points in relation to energy and the environment. We're talking about animals, we're talking about technologies that we can be able to implement in order to mitigate some of the problems that we are facing, like climate change and all that. Adrian, before you leave, I'll love maybe for you to discuss as to whether the environment, as we're talking about it today, when we talk about environmental justice. So I want you to discuss that issue of environmental justice. Do we really need the blockchain, for us to be able to mitigate this issue of environmental justice?
of this whole that we need, right? And especially the last speaker, I spent about a year on the ground in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria for FEMA, resetting the way that the U.S.
Critical facilities. And I'm currently leading a large engineering team at a renewable energy company to build utility scale solar plants. And so my connection to sustainable energy is about a decade.
Create more sustainable communities and environments, whether they be on a building or in the middle of a country, right? There's opportunities for us to use these technologies, not just blockchain, but then complement it with other technologies in order to create more resilient communities. I think one of the things that I feel is that we have to take advantage of these catastrophic events. We should not build them back the same way that they were. We've got to take advantage of the technologies like blockchain. So when Tasha speaks about, I think about virtual contracts, right? And you could actually create machine-to-machine interactions where those contracts could play out, and you could distribute that energy in a very seamless as well as resilient manner. In other words, if you lost one portion of the grid, you could use that microgrid technology and microgrids in general to actually then create energy or a backup capability or shift that load, right? And then if you think about financing, all of that is an opportunity for our communities to strengthen themselves. All of that then could begin to address these environmental justice issues that we see, these disparities. And again, one of the things I want to point out is that one of the things that we've been saying is our Black community has a lot of resources. Whether we view it or not, we have a lot of dollars. Now, the question is, how are we going to leverage those dollars together to create more resiliency in those communities that we're concerned about, right? So a lot of the challenges I have, say, are underserved and at risk and disadvantaged. Even within those communities, they have assets. People can be assets. Churches, different institutional mechanisms that the communities actually respect and trust are assets, right? And so the thing is, how do we pool those assets together, create a plan and strategy to implement real time
how we're going to strengthen those communities. And I'm saying things can be done right now. So, for example, we are working with, in New Orleans, we're working with a couple of the community-based organizations to talk about how to shift, and create opportunities to address food security, because food security is a big issue. It's going to continue to be an issue as this economic downturn continues as a result of COVID and having to take measures from a standpoint of social distancing, shutting down economies. All of those things are impacting the way that our folks are being, are reacting to and surviving these catastrophic events. So I think it is this whole notion of how do all of these technologies and these processes work together to create a whole and create a strategy that can be implemented. And it's not just one technology like blockchain. Again, it can be looking at, how does artificial intelligence and machine learning play in that? Because there's a whole opportunity to now skill up the workforce to actually now be part of this resurgence of these new technologies, which again, could create more sustainable communities and neighborhoods and individuals. So the whole thing of self-sufficiency, I think, is important, but we have to take our power back. We have to take that back as an individual. We have to take that back as the community. And I'm saying it has to start with us, right? And so we have to change our mindset. The leadership, our Black leadership has to change their mindset. Our individuals have to change their mindsets. Families have to change their mindsets in order to make that a reality. But thank you for letting me have my say before I jumped off. I really appreciate the panelists, and thank you each for your perspective.
Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate all these beautiful discussions and these beautiful points that you came up with. And have a very good day.
All right, take care.
Yes, we continue with our discussion. Dumelo, if you are around, we're talking environmental justice and the blockchain. Does the environment really need the blockchain? Need that?
It just depends in terms of how and in a way do we need the blockchain? Because even on one of our webinars, when was it, last month, when we launched our smart farming platform. So the platform is to enable farmers to have access to international markets, and we basically track all their produce, and then we use a currency to be able to make the international payment. But one of the people on the webinar actually asked and said, "Look, you actually don't need blockchain for this. Why?" And it was actually it was very interesting, and actually it was quite a challenging question. And I, gave my team and I quite a lot of thought to put into it. And and I think coming to your point, do we need blockchain? It just depends on what the real use case is, because even let's say with the architecture of a new system or solution, it needs a problem. So what is the problem at hand? And why we kind of chose the blockchain 4 years ago was to take advantage of the crowdfunding opportunities, was to also take advantage of the transparency and as well as what can I say, the decentralization of information. So and I think also blockchain itself, still being a very new area in the industry, and we're only really starting to realize its true power and capabilities now. Now there's a whole new trend of decentralized finance, and quite a few years ago it was all about initial coin offerings and creating currencies. Now it's about decentralized finance, and I think I think what's happening is what's supposed to be happening is that the industry itself has evolved, and it's evolving and is becoming more decentralized. Practicing the hypothesis of what blockchain is all about is creating that decentralization of power, that immutability and anonymity of, but also it's about inclusion. So I think if for us, let's say, trying to get international people involved in our cause for conservation and to try and help us raise funds, we use the blockchain as a method for transparency of where their funds actually went, and the transparency of what we're doing with the funds. So I think from that aspect, maybe we're trying to do something,
And we're still trying to learn more in terms of how we could create more opportunities. I mean, someone mentioned about the carbon tax. We're also quite aware of, and we've looked into different carbon projects on the blockchain where you could take satellite readings and actually now sell that, sell that space, that virtual space on the blockchain. It's something that's very interesting and, directly helps the conservation because it's an environmental factor. So, I kind of go back to, it also depends on the quality of the build of the solution, right? The blockchain is a nice word, it's a nice thing, but how are we actually using it? How are we actually applying it? And so that's why I'm also very reserved. I love blockchain, but I'm also very reserved in terms of where and how we use the blockchain itself. So I think, we should also just be careful because we come also from a time 4 years ago when the blockchain itself was also abused. Just like money, everybody's using money for good and bad. And unfortunately, the blockchain 10 years ago and 4 years ago with the initial coin offerings, the ecosystem was abused to unjustifiably enrich very few, which kind of rotted the entire ecosystem in terms of reputation. So going back, it just depends what is the purpose of it. I mean, I look at, let's say, yourself, Alakanani, is that, you are providing a lot of blockchain inclusion and education in Botswana, in Africa. You become a pioneer to do that, right? You become the Bitcoin lady. In Africa, I've become, the farmer, the Bitcoin farmer, because now I'm giving hope to farmers in the space of, being able to accept and trade internationally to the international market. So that in itself, we have, kind of taken advantage of what's happening in the technology and kind of made the most and the best out of it, and creating that inclusion. And look, to be honest with you, we're not the first or the last people to be in our position. I mean, there's quite a few people who are involved in the blockchain space in Botswana as well, but not as much as and prominently as much as our sister, and because she's a great reference. She's a good reference. There are a lot of scammers out there, so that's also another thing. I mean, people have wasted and abused our this wonderful technology. So I just kind of, it's almost like artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is also incredibly powerful, but also very dangerous, if poorly abused and poorly used. So, and I think anything in technology, kind of given the right mindset, the right architecture, to almost build it as you can say perfect as possible, without as much error. So, I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Okay, thank you, Tumelo. That's very good. It's very important to know when and when not to use the blockchain technology, and also to be very careful to use it proper, so that it doesn't become abuse. Any tool, whether good or bad, when it's not, any tool, even if it's good, when in the hands of the wrong person, it might not be used properly. Thank you very much, Telly.
Hi. Okay, so well, for me, it's a number of things, and I agree with Tumelo. Blockchain by itself solves a lot of problems if it's used right, but it doesn't solve all the problems. For instance, in the space of sustainable justice and sustainable energy, I would say the fundamental building block is data and analytics. You can't manage what you can't measure. So to say, oh, blockchain is the, is the shining light, it really is a component of a much larger infrastructure to use. So you need to have requisite types of technologies. You need to kind of leverage, cloud storage. And the reality is, some centralization might be necessary, depending on what the criteria is. So I think it's a combination of both centralized, decentralized, I'll say even more distributed, because this decentralization leads to some models for distribution. Leveraging data, leveraging AI, machine learning, because now we are amassing a lot of data. Blockchain can handle that kind of data, but we can attest things so that we can see the provenance of where the carbon is. So I can see an application in carbon accounting and energy accounting and stuff like that. We can start tracking, and we can track impact as well very efficiently. So as Tumelo said, transparency, provenance, these things are great. On the other hand, what I see useful blockchain is blockchain fundamentally being a decentralized technology allows, or should I say leverages or accelerates the use case of decentralization, right? So you're moving from centralized power production to decentralized power production. That whole model requires blockchain. They've tried to do it. The reason why we haven't been able to address climate change and impact is because there is a disconnect, huge disconnect. But the people who are dealing with our environment, our custodians for the environment, and all these people, they're not looking at technology, and they're not leveraging the technology to get the data. I keep going to events and we talk about, well, we don't have the data for this. We don't have the data for that. But I mean, for goodness sake, by now, data science and data analytics should be a primary baseline. Then the other thing is, they're distributed. Everybody's creating energy. It means all of us right here could actually be power producers. How do you handle that? Blockchain can definitely support that type of use case in terms of the organization. And if you want to go into it, it facilitates ecosystem models. It facilitates decentralized organizations. So in that context, it allows us to collaborate better without butting each other's heads. Because, we in the Black community, we have a unsaid thing to still, a partnership is a leaky ship. Okay, well, now we have some transparency. So there are no more leakages, when it comes to transacting money and stuff. Then on the other side, you have now efficiency when it comes to payments and transactions, the speed and agility. If we can transact in a much faster pace, that stimulates the economy, right? You see it happening in Kenya, just looking at M-Pesa, not really applied to anything sustainable yet, but then look at what M-Pesa did. Now, when you apply that to now, say, payments for farmers and that sort of thing, it stimulates the economy. So there are certain linkages that might not seem apparent on the surface, but they are apparent. And then now we talk about capital markets. Accelerating capital markets, making it more efficient. The fact that we can start creating new assets. We can tokenize real assets, real commodities. We can offer fractional ownership. It means we can mobilize capital even faster, right? So, people will talk about, STOs, but there's a real use case. And to be honest, I think developing countries and the Black community, underserved markets, is where the opportunity is. So we have a huge market potential. We're just not focused, unfortunately. So then it comes down to what the other gentleman said. How do we become self-sufficient? And how can we then leverage blockchain for self-sufficiency, right? We need to train, we need to be able to train and understand how these things work together. So no, for me, blockchain alone isn't going to solve the problem. That's why when we mapped out our own model for digital financial market infrastructure, and specifically looking at how it applies to climate finance, we looked at a whole composite of different technologies all working together, in order to create impact and create, should I say, transformational impact, not social impact. I hate the word social impact. No. Transformational impact. It means societies, our people are empowered, right? So, but it does also require people to acquire new skill sets. So I think the way forward is, yes, blockchain is important, but they need to also understand other technologies, other fourth revolution technologies that can work together to really address environmental justice.
Okay, thank you very much, Telly. Good point. We need continuity. We need to work together to pull out resources, to use existing infrastructure, I would say, in order for us to be able to reach what we want to achieve with the blockchain and in energy and in environment. We'll have Tasha, the last 5 minutes. You can summarize what we are talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you guys hear me clearly here? Through my mic?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Yeah. You know, I agree a lot of what Kelly said and what the gentleman before said in terms of there needs to be a use case for blockchain. I mean, it doesn't solve all the problems. You know, that technology in concert with others should definitely be considered. I agree also with Kelly when she said that blockchain can help facilitate decentralization, especially when it comes to distributed resources and energy specifically. Just using the U.S. Grid infrastructure, the traditional format of the grid infrastructure, we've had utility companies that have built out, you know, our generating plants. They've built out the transmission facilities. And they invest in that based on the rate case or the payments that we as end users pay to them. That investment has slowed down tremendously. There's a lot of conversation about grid modernization at this point. And utilities just have not, you know, made that same degree of investment at the rate that we've needed them to make. And so, you know, as these distributed resources come online, it's going to take individuals, the people, to really drive, you know, that distribution and that particular technology. And I think blockchain kind of helps facilitate that because now the typical process of investing in distributed resources would be there would be an overhaul and there would be greater access by the end users to investing in those distributed resources, to monetizing those distributed resources. So it really creates a different funding source than what, you know, the industry has historically, you know, leveraged. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's in the renewable energy industry, and she's on the origination side of the house. And we were talking about project finance and traditional funding sources and how, as it relates to community solar, they just don't, in most cases, have the risk profile to fund, you know, community solar, and how the traditional financing institutions have to come up with a new model to be able to engage and invest. Well, if we do have blockchain, then we won't have those obstacles in place that will help facilitate investment and growth in the distributed energy resource space. So I think the original question was, is blockchain really necessary as it relates to environmental justice? Yes and no. You know, I think that's been stated here. Yes, you know, as it relates to putting the power in the hands of the people, but, you know, not necessarily if that's not something that, you know, as a crowd, you know, we you know, value per se. So, you know, those are essentially, you know, my thoughts about blockchain and environmental justice.
Thank you very much. I think we've discussed quite interesting points, and I would love to take this time to thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to come and talk about this very important topic which affects all of us. We know we've got challenges in our environment that we need to be addressed. We also have issues of energy. How do we, you know, use all this, you know, to try and, you know, bring sustainability to our people, to bring sustainability to everyone involved. So thank you very much for the points. I believe this it's something we could discuss even more, but because we have very limited time, I'll have to take this time to thank you and, go and, study more, see how we can turn all those challenges that we have for the environment and all these challenges we have on the climate, how we can turn all these into opportunities using the blockchain technology. Maybe next time when we meet, we'll discuss, some of the use cases that we have around which try to address this issue that we're discussing today. Have a wonderful time, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much, guys.